Very good afternoon, students. Now, in this video, which is from the general anatomy, and the chapter is muscles. Now, in this, I'm going to tell you about how the muscles they produce a desired movement. For example, when your teachers are teaching about the muscles, they must be telling you that the flexion is produced by this muscle, extension is produced by the other muscles. Okay, they must be naming the muscles producing the flexion and extension. For example, the flexion at the elbow joint is produced by biceps and brachialis. But this is partly true, not 100% true. Now the biceps and brachialis, though they are producing the movement of flexion at elbow, but they are not the only muscle which are responsible. There are many more muscles which are responsible for production of the flexion or extension at the elbow joint or at any other joint. So we will learn about this important aspect of the muscle or the movements of the joints by the muscles. Now, as I said that a desired movement at a joint is not produced by a single muscle or group of a muscle. Okay, they are not just responsible. Okay, which you are learning. Okay, but there are many more muscles are required to produce a desired movement at a particular joint. As I gave the example in the last slide that the extension and flexion is not only produced by the tricep is responsible for extension at the elbow, and biceps and brachialis they are responsible for flexion. But these are not the only muscles which will produce the extension or flexion. There are many more muscles. So each and every movement at any specific joint is not produced by a single muscle, but it is produced by many muscles. Okay, and we will learn about these. Okay, this aspect of the movements at a joint which is produced by many muscles. Okay, now the following groups of muscles are involved. See the mark, the pointer here. The following groups of muscles are involved in the production of a particular movement, not only one or a group of muscle. This is the first kind of muscle which are responsible for the production of movement at a joint. They are the prime mover. One group is prime mover. Second group, which is also responsible for production of the same movement, is also called as antagonist. This is another group. Okay, prime movers may be one group, antagonist is another group of muscles. Then the third group is fixator muscles, and the fourth group is synergist. So there are four group of muscles, or at least three groups of muscle: prime mover, antagonist and fixator. They are involved in the production of the movement at a joint. Let us see in more detail which are the prime mover, antagonist, fixator, and how they are producing a desired movement at a particular joint. I am moving to the next slide. Now, let us come to the first group of muscles which are called as the prime movers. Okay. Now, these prime movers are the main muscles to produce the specific movements. Specific movements are produced by the prime mover. For example, as I said, biceps and brachialis are the prime movers at the elbow joint for the movement of flexion. So flexion at the elbow, as we learn in our books, is that because of the contraction of the biceps and brachialis muscle. Okay, thus these muscles they are called as prime mover. That means they are the main muscles responsible for production of a movement at a joint. You can call them as prime movers. It may be a single muscle or it may be a group of muscles. Okay, for example, here there are two muscles which are responsible for flexion at the elbow. Thus they are the prime movers muscles. Let us first see this diagram. The first diagram here, you can see from humerus the prime mover biceps is taking origin. Okay, though it is not taking origin, but here you can imagine that it is taking origin and going to get attached onto that of the ulna. But in real sense, we have seen that there are two muscles, long head and the short head of the biceps, okay, which goes and get attached onto the ulna as well as the radius, okay. But here for simplicity I have drawn this diagram where the, say for example, this is biceps, this proximal end is attached to humerus and distal end is attached to ulna, and it is crossing the joint, that is the elbow joint, anteriorly. So when it will contract, it will move the ulna upward, that means towards the humerus, and the angle between the humerus and ulna will reduce, and this movement is flexion. So this muscle is mainly responsible along with the brachialis for production of the elbow, I mean say the flexion at the elbow. So these muscles are called as prime mover. But in the same diagram, you are seeing a muscle which has the opposite action, and the muscle which has the opposite action at the elbow here, opposite to flexion, is the extension movement. Okay, you already know that the opposite movement of flexion is extension, and in this case, in the elbow joint, this muscle which produces the extension is called as the triceps. It is called as, which is also attached to the ulna. Okay, it is also attached to the ulna. Thus, this muscle is, since having the opposite movement than the flexion or the prime mover movement, and this is called as the antagonist. So here the tricep muscles which produce the extension movement which is opposite through the flexion is called as antagonist. So these muscles have opposite action to the prime mover. Which one? Antagonist. Triceps is thus an antagonist to the biceps and brachialis as it produces the extension of the elbow. Now, this role of the prime mover and antagonist muscle may change. For example, when flexion is taking place, okay, the muscle is the biceps prime mover and the triceps become antagonist. Triceps become antagonist. But when the extension movement will take place, at that time the contraction will take place in the triceps, and thus the triceps for the extension movement is prime mover, which was for flexion movement antagonist. Now for extension movement it has become the prime mover, and at the same time the biceps which was prime mover for flexion movement, now for the external movement it is antagonist. Okay, so the role of the prime mover and antagonist keeps on changing, okay, with the opposite movement. Thus the prime mover for a movement may also act as antagonist for opposite movement. I hope that you have understood which are prime mover muscles and which are antagonist muscle, and how their role changes with the change on the opposite movements. Okay, that you should first understand. Now I am moving to the next slide where I will tell you why a antagonist is necessary for a particular movement, that is for flexion which is taking place at an elbow where the prime mover is biceps and brachialis. What is the role of the triceps? Okay, that is antagonist. Now for the production of any movement, prime mover and antagonist act together. This I am telling you for the first time. Okay, it is not only that prime mover is only a contracting and producing the movement. At the very same time, the antagonist is also active. Okay, it is all, and there both the action of the antagonist and prime mover are necessary for movement. They should act together. That is, the speed of contraction of prime mover, that is here biceps and brachialis, okay, should be equal to that of the speed of the relaxation of antagonist. That means triceps should relax with the same speed in which the prime mover, that is biceps and brachialis, are contracting. Okay, that means the speed of contraction of prime mover should match to the speed of relaxation. Okay, so because of the relaxation and the contraction simultaneous, the movements will be smooth, not a jerky movement. Okay, we never get jerky movements at our joints. That means there should be a complete balance between the prime mover and antagonist muscle for producing a smooth movement. Okay, and how it is possible? Now then the question comes, how one muscle is contracting and the antagonist or opposite muscle is relaxing, and that's too with the same speed. Okay, same speed. And for this, let us see this diagram. And in this diagram, this is the motor axon coming from brain, which is having synaptic contact with two types of neuron. One of the neuron is supplying to the biceps here. Okay, its axon is supplying to the biceps, which is a prime mover for flexion. And then at the same time, the same axonal branch, okay, is having a synaptic contact with an inhibitory neuron, which in turn is having synaptic contact with the motor neuron, which is supplying to the triceps muscle. But this intermediate neuron is an inhibitory neuron. That means this will lead to the inhibition of the action of the neuron which is in the cerebrum or the brain. So this inhibition will lead to the relaxation of triceps. On the other hand, the same will lead to the contraction of the prime mover. So because of the inhibition of the movement in the antagonist, there will be relaxation of the muscle, and at the same time there will be contraction in the prime mover. That means for a particular movement, both the muscles are supplied by neurons where impulse are going. In prime mover it is excitatory impulse, while in the antagonist muscle there is an inhibitory movement is going. So this kind of the innervation where both the muscles are simultaneously supplied with the opposite role, in one excitatory and in another inhibitory, is called as the reciprocal innervation. Innervation means no supply. Okay, reciprocal innervation, the innervation which leads to the simultaneous contraction of prime mover and the relaxation of antagonist, is known as the reciprocal innervation. In one muscle, prime mover, it is contraction. In the opposite muscle, that is antagonist, it is the relaxation which is taking place. And this is possible because of the nerve supply, which is called as the reciprocal innervation. I hope you have understood what is the reciprocal innervation. Let us come not only this prime mover and that of the antagonist muscles are responsible for producing any movement at a joint. But there is a third group of muscle which is also necessary for production of a particular movement at a joint. Though we very simply say that flexion is by biceps and brachialis and extension is by tricep, but this is not complete picture. Okay, there is a third group of muscle which is also helping in production of the flexion or extension. Okay, extension. This group of muscles are called as the fixator. So this is the third group of the muscle, fixator. So when movements are taking place at the distal end of the bone, say for this is humerus in this diagram, and at the distal end of the humerus, this is the elbow joint where the ulna is articulating with the humerus. Okay. Now these movements of flexion and extension that takes place at the elbow joint, which is at the distal end of the humerus bone, okay. But at the same time, the proximal end of the same bone, means the proximal end or the upper end of the humerus is kept fixed, okay. It is kept fixed. That means the end is rigidly fixed. It cannot move. There cannot take place any movement of the shoulder joint where it is forming a shoulder, upper end is forming a shoulder joint, and these muscles are so tightly contracting at the upper end of the humerus, which are attached at the upper end of the humerus, that no movements can take place at shoulder joint, and humerus is thus stabilized, or it is kept fixed, so that the distal end, the movements which are taking place at the distal end can take place efficiently, So the third group of muscle are also helping in flexion at the elbow joint, and these are the fixator muscle which are attached at the other end of the bone and keeping this joint fixed, which is a shoulder joint. Now, just I will tell you, when you are listening to me, just try to flex your elbow. Okay, just see me. You try to flex your elbow here like this. You are flexing your elbow like this, and this is because of the biceps and the brachialis muscle. Okay, and the relaxation is in the triceps muscle, which is with the same speed. Okay, further, just to visualize the action of the third group, that is fixator, you just first put your hand, your palm, okay, your palm on your deltoid, where as I am putting here, just put your hand onto the deltoid muscle, and then try to perform the flexion movement. Just try to perform the flexion movement. What is the, and press your this hand onto your deltoid muscle, which is at shoulder. What is the condition of the deltoid? The deltoid muscle is taut, it is hard. And why it is hard? Because it is fixator muscle, and at the same time when you are producing the flexion, this muscle is also contracting, okay, and keeping the upper end of the humerus, okay, stable, not allowing it to move, okay, fixed at the shoulder joint, okay. And this is because at that time you can move this elbow or do the flexion or extension, okay, very effectively or easily, okay. Otherwise, if fixators are not working, and there are many fixators which are keeping the upper end of the humerus fixed, it may be supraspinatus, infraspinatus, teres minor, subscapularis, deltoid. So many muscles at the same time are contracting here around the shoulder joint to keep it fixed. If they are not working, if fixator, then your movement of the flexion and extension will not be, because your upper end of the humerus at the same time will also keep on moving as I am moving, and but this is not taking place, okay. This is not happening when you are producing the flexion or the extension movements. And so not only prime mover, which is responsible for a particular movement of at a joint, at the same time its antagonist muscle is also acting, at the same time its fixators are also acting, which are attached away from the joint where movement is taking place, okay. So these muscles which are acting at proximal end of the bones are called as fixators, okay. So now you have understood the three group of muscles which are responsible for production of a desired movement at a particular joint. I am moving to the fourth group of the muscle, which is also necessary at some time, not always, but at some time. Now, this fourth group of muscle is called a synergist. See this, synergist muscle. And this, for to understand this, just try to understand here that if a muscle is very long, the muscle is very long muscle, for example, okay. This long muscle means it is crossing to the many joint. Let me try to show you in this camera. Okay, if the muscles is very long, coming from the forearm and going towards the fingers, okay, these are the fingers, it is going right up to the finger. If it is going right up, coming from forearm. Say for example, it is flexor digitorum superficialis or flexor digitorum profundus, which are attached to the distal end of the fingers. And if you want to contract if you want to produce the flexion of the fingers, then these muscles are active, but they are coming from forearm, so they will be having the action at many other joints. That means they are crossing to the wrist joints, they are crossing to the intercarpal joints, they are crossing to the carpo-metacarpal joint, they are crossing to the metacarpophalangeal joint, they are crossing to the interphalangeal. So many joints are crossed by these long muscles and their tendons. So when you will produce the movement of flexion like this, okay, like this, as I am producing the movement of flexion as I am producing here, okay, you also try to produce a fist, okay, a tight fist. You produce the tight fist like that, okay. And if you produce this kind of the tight fist, which is nothing but the flexion of the fingers, at the same time you will notice that at the wrist joint there is extension, though you are producing the flexion of the finger, but at the same time there is the extension of the wrist joint. Okay, this I am showing you, the extension is here. Okay, this is the extension, this is the extension at the wrist joint. Now, though your muscles are flexor muscle, but why then the extensor is active here? These muscles, the extensor active at the wrist joint so that you can efficiently produce the flexion at the fingers. So try to do this flexion when there is a flexion at the wrist joint, just opposite to the extension. So produce the flexion at the wrist joint and then try to flex your finger. Can you make a strong fist? No, you cannot make. See, I am trying to make a strong fist here or flexing, but it's not strong. It is weak. It is weak in comparison to the fist which I have produced when there is an extension at the wrist joint. So this group of muscles which will make it effective, or effective movements can take place at distal joints, is also called as synergist. Thus the synergist muscles are antagonists, because here we are trying to flex our finger, but here there is an extension at the wrist. Okay, so they are antagonist as well as they are fixator. They are playing two roles. They are antagonists because we are trying to do the flexion, but then the extensor muscles, they are antagonist and they are fixing the wrist joint so that the flexion and the fingers can take place efficiently. Okay, so I have told you about this four group of muscles. So in a nutshell, at the bottom I will try to say that thus far as single movements at a joint beside the prime movers, which are main muscle, prime movers are main muscle, which our teachers are teaching in the class that this movement is because of this muscle, okay, but they are partly correct. Okay, there are many other muscles like antagonist, fixator, synergist. They are also involved in production of that joint. Thus I think you must have learned for the first time that all movements which are taking place at our joints, they are not very simple. They are very complex. They are very complex, and not a single muscle prime mover, but there are many muscles are involved in production of an efficient movement at a particular joint. Thank you very much for watching this video.